Welcome back to J&M Bedtime Stories. Tonight we cover Part 2 of the 50 States of True Crime, Series 2. If you enjoy this content, please consider subscribing and commenting down below. While you're there, hit the like button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Tonight we cover states from Georgia all the way to Missouri. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Georgia. Yorellis Rivera was a tragic victim of a horrific crime that took place in Canton, Georgia, in December 2011. Yorellis Rivera was a 7-year-old girl living with her family in the River Ridge apartment complex in Canton. On December 2nd, 2011, she was outside playing with her friends near the complex. She told her friends she was going inside to get drinks and never returned. Her disappearance triggered an Amber Alert, and a massive search began involving local law enforcement, the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, the FBI, and hundreds of volunteers. Flyers went up around the city, and the case gained intense media attention. On December 5th, 2011, after a few days of searching, police found her body in a dumpster at the apartment complex. It had been compacted in a trash compactor. Authorities confirmed that Yorellis had been assaulted, beaten, and ultimately murdered. The brutality of the crime shocked the entire community. The investigation moved quickly. Police zeroed in on Ryan Brunn, a 20-year-old maintenance worker at the complex. He had no prior criminal record, but had access to the property, including the vacant apartment where Yorellis was last seen alive. Surveillance footage, witness statements, and forensic evidence linked Brunn to the crime. He was arrested on December 11th, 2011. Shortly after his arrest, Brunn confessed in detail to the crime. He admitted luring Yorellis into a vacant apartment with a promise of candy. There, he attacked her, beat her, and then stabbed her in the throat. Afterwards, he put her body in a trash bag, cleaned the scene, and dumped her in the compactor. Just a few days later, on January 3rd, 2012, Brunn was found dead in his prison cell, having committed by hanging. His death occurred only a day after he led investigators through a reenactment of the murder, showing chilling detail about what he did. The murder of Yorellis Rivera had a deep impact on the Canton community and beyond. It raised serious concerns about background checks for people working in close proximity to children, especially in residential areas. The case also prompted discussions around child safety laws and led to stronger community watch efforts in many apartment complexes throughout Georgia. Hawaii. The murder of Dana Ireland is one of the most haunting and controversial criminal cases in Hawaii's recent history. It took place on Christmas Eve, 1991, near the town of Puna on Big Island of Hawaii, close to Hilo. Dana Ireland was a 23-year-old woman from Virginia who had recently moved to Hawaii. She was athletic, full of life, and had a passion for the outdoors. On the day of the incident, she went out for a bike ride along the scenic Kapaho-Kalapana Road near the town of Puna. At around 5 p.m. on Christmas Eve, passerby found Dana Ireland near the edge of a remote fishing trail. She was barely alive, severely injured, and bloodied. Her clothes had been torn, and it was apparent that she had been assaulted and beaten. Shockingly, Her bicycle was found miles away from where she was discovered, suggesting she had been transported in a vehicle. Ireland was airlifted to Hilo Medical Center but died later that evening from massive blood loss and internal injuries. The brutality of the attack shocked the local community and law enforcement. It triggered an intensive investigation that would go on for years and generate significant controversy. For years, the case went cold, despite wide media coverage and multiple tips. But in 1994, the case gained traction again when a man named Frank Pauline Jr., already incarcerated for unrelated crimes, claimed to have information about Dana's murder. He implicated himself and two brothers, Sean Schweitzer and Albert Ian Schweitzer. Pauline told authorities that he and the Schweitzer brothers were involved in the crime, alleging they hit Dana with a car, abducted her, assaulted her, and left her for dead. However, his story changed multiple times, and there were inconsistencies that would later raise doubts. Despite the lack of physical evidence, no DNA, no eyewitnesses connecting them to the scene, prosecutors moved forward based largely on Pauline's testimony and circumstantial evidence. Frank Pauline Jr. was convicted in 1999 and sentenced to life in prison. Ian Schweitzer was convicted in 2000 and also sentenced to life. Sean Schweitzer, the youngest, took a plea deal for manslaughter and kidnapping in exchange for probation. None of the DNA recovered at the crime scene matched any of the men. Still, the convictions stood for years. From early on, the case drew skepticism. Advocates, legal analysts, and journalists pointed out the inconsistencies in Pauline's statements, the lack of forensic evidence, and potential misconduct during interrogation and prosecution. The Innocence Project eventually got involved, helping to push for DNA retesting and re-examination of the case. In 2023, after years of legal battles, DNA testing on key evidence, including a bloody t-shirt found near Dana's body, excluded all three convicted men. Instead, it pointed to an unknown man, suggesting the real perpetrator was still unidentified and at large. As a result, Ian Schweitzer was released from prison in January 2023 after spending over 20 years. Frank Pauline had already died in prison in 2015, killed by other inmates. Sean Schweitzer's conviction was also vacated. The murder of Dana Ireland remains unsolved to this day. The case is a tragic example of how a flawed investigation and reliance on unreliable testimony can lead to wrongful convictions. It has become a touchstone for criminal justice reform in Hawaii, particularly concerning interrogation practices, forensic science, and prosecutorial integrity. Idaho. The University of Idaho's student murders in Moscow was a shocking and tragic case that captured national and international attention due to its brutality, mystery, and the small, tight-knit community in which it occurred. In the early hours of Sunday, November 13, 2022, 4 University of Idaho students were stabbed to death in an off-campus rental home at 1122 King Road, a house located near the university in the town of Moscow, Idaho. Ethan and Xana were a couple, while Kaylee and Madison were best friends. The house was known among students for its proximity to campus and social gatherings. Kaylee and Madison spent the night out at a bar called Corner Club and then stopped at a food truck around 1:40 a.m. before getting a ride home, arriving around 1:56 a.m. Ethan and Xana were believed to have returned from a fraternity party around the same time. Two other roommates, Bethany and Dylan, were also home that night, staying on the ground and second floors. They were unharmed and likely slept through the attacks. The bodies were discovered around noon on November 13th after one of the surviving roommates called 911, reporting an unconscious person. First responders quickly realized it was a mass homicide. There was no sign of forced entry, and the attack was described as targeted and personal, involving a large fixed-blade knife. The weapon was not found at the scene. The lack of immediate suspects or motive, and the isolated nature of the town added to the fear and frustration. Students left campus, and classes were moved online. Police asked the public for patience and tips, while emphasizing the complexity of the investigation. On December 30th, 2022, authorities arrested Brian Christopher Kohberger, a 28-year-old criminology PhD student at Washington State University in nearby Pullman, just 10 miles from Moscow. Kohberger had studied criminal justice and criminology for years and reportedly showed interest in the psychology of criminals. He was tracked down through a combination of DNA evidence, surveillance footage, cell phone data, and a white Hyundai Elantra seen near the crime scene. Key evidence included DNA on a knife sheath found at the scene, cell phone pings showing Kohberger in the area on multiple occasions before and after the killings, surveillance footage of the suspect's car moving suspiciously near the King Road house during the time of the murders. Kohberger was extradited from Pennsylvania, where he had returned to visit family for the holidays, and charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. As of early 2025, Kohberger has not yet gone to trial. His defense has raised questions about the handling of evidence and is seeking to move the trial out of Latah County due to extensive media coverage. He has not entered a plea but is presumed innocent until proven guilty. The case is expected to hinge on forensic evidence, digital tracking, the potential motive, though no clear motive has been publicly confirmed. The murders deeply affected the University of Idaho and the broader community. Memorials, vigils, and tributes were held across the country. The university increased security and offered support services for students and staff. The case drew comparisons to true crime narratives due to its setting, the suspect's background in criminology, and the use of advanced investigative techniques. It raised awareness about campus safety and sparked discussions about the criminal justice system, particularly regarding media coverage and public interest in real-life tragedies. Illinois. The Richard Speck murders, one of the most chilling mass murders in American history, occurred in Chicago, Illinois on the night of July 13th to 14th, 1966. Richard Benjamin Speck was born on December 6, 1941, in Kirkwood, Illinois. He had a troubled upbringing marked by poverty, abuse, and petty crime. After a series of arrests for burglary and assault, he drifted through jobs and spent time in and out of jail. By 1966, he was 24 years old and already had a long criminal record. Speck had a history of alcohol abuse and increasingly erratic, violent behavior. In early July 1966, Speck arrived in Chicago looking for work. He stayed in cheap lodging houses and tried to get a job as a seaman, which he had done before. After a failed attempt to board a ship and a few days of heavy drinking, Speck spiraled into a mental state that would culminate in one of the most brutal crimes in Illinois history. On the evening of July 13, 1966, Speck broke into a townhouse located at 2319 East 100th Street in the Jeffrey Manor neighborhood on Chicago's South Side. The building housed student nurses from South Chicago Community Hospital, 8 of whom were home that night. Speck entered the house armed with a knife. He claimed he only intended to rob the place, but quickly took control of the women, tying them up and herding them into a room. Over the course of several hours, he methodically took them out of the room one by one, assaulted them, and murdered all but one, who managed to survive by hiding under a bed and remaining silent for hours. Speck used different methods to kill women: stabbing, strangulation, and one was reportedly assaulted. The crime scene was gruesome. The victims were left posed in degrading ways, and there were signs of a sadistic, chaotic frenzy. The lone survivor finally escaped after hiding for hours and alerted the police. The murder stunned Chicago and the nation. The crime was senseless and horrific. Police had a few leads at first, but a composite sketch based on the survivor's description helped. The key break came when a drifter who had shared a room with Speck recognized him from a newspaper sketch and tipped off the police. Speck, who had attempted to end his own life, was found in a seedy hotel room on July 17, 1966. He was taken to Cook County Hospital for treatment, where staff noticed his "Born to Raise Hell" tattoo, a detail that matched the witness description. Speck's trial began in April 1967. The main witness was the lone survivor, who bravely testified and identified him as the killer. The prosecution also presented strong physical evidence, including fingerprints. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 49 minutes before finding him guilty on all counts of murder. He was sentenced to death. However, in 1972, the U.S. Supreme Court abolished the death penalty temporarily, and Speck's sentence was commuted to life in prison. Speck served his sentence at Stateville Correctional Center in Joliet, Illinois. Over the years, he gained notoriety for bizarre behavior in prison, including drug use and a now infamous videotape smuggled out in the 1990s showing him engaged in acts, using drugs, and speaking openly about the murders with chilling indifference. The tape shocked the public and raised serious concerns about the prison system. Richard Speck died of a heart attack on December 5, 1991, one day before his 50th birthday. The murders had a lasting impact on American society. They changed how nursing programs housed students and influenced public attitudes about crime, punishment, and security. The horror of the event, combined with Speck's lack of remorse, made the case one of the most infamous in U.S. criminal history. Indiana. The Delphi murders refer to a tragic and highly publicized case involving the murders of Abigail Abby Williams and Liberty Libby German, 2 teenage girls from Delphi, Indiana. The case drew national attention due to its chilling circumstances, mysterious evidence, and the long investigation that followed. On February 13, 2017, the 2 best friends, Abby and Libby, were walking the Delphi Historic Trails, specifically the Monon High Bridge Trail in Delphi, Indiana. The girls were off school that day due to a scheduled day off. They decided to go hiking on the Monon High Bridge Trail, a popular but somewhat remote walking trail. Libby's sister dropped them off around 1:35 p.m. They were supposed to be picked up later that afternoon, but they never arrived at the designated meeting spot. When the girls didn't return, their families became concerned and reported them missing. A large volunteer search party was organized, and on February 14, 2017, their bodies were found about a half a mile from the Monon High Bridge. The exact manner of their deaths was not released initially, and much of the case remains under wraps due to the ongoing investigation. This case stood out due to the critical evidence captured by Libby German on her phone just moments before the girls were believed to have been attacked. There was an audio recording with a male voice saying, "Down the hill," believed to be the suspect. Also, a brief video showing a man walking towards the girls on the bridge, wearing jeans, a blue jacket, and a hat. Libby's quick thinking in capturing this media was hailed as heroic and crucial to the case. Authorities released portions of the audio and video in hopes the public could identify the man. 2 composite sketches were released. The first in 2017 showed an older-looking man. A revised sketch in 2019 depicted a younger man. Police later said both sketches were valid, but focused on the younger appearance moving forward. The case remained unsolved for more than 5 years, despite national media coverage, numerous tips, and even true crime podcast investigations. Multiple people were investigated, but no charges were filed until 2022. In October 2022, a major breakthrough came. Richard M. Allen, a 50-year-old Delphi resident and CVS pharmacy technician, was arrested and charged with the murders. A bullet found near the girls' bodies was later matched to a gun owned by Allen. He also reportedly admitted to being on the Monon High Bridge that day. Allen's appearance matched the man seen in the video clip captured by Libby. He had previously told investigators back in 2017 that he was at the trails that day of the murders, but hadn't been arrested at that time. Allen was formally charged with 2 counts of murder and held without bond. The case took a bizarre turn in 2023 when some of Allen's attorneys introduced a theory involving ritualistic or cult activity. The defense argued that Allen was being framed or that other individuals were involved. Prosecutors, however, stuck to the physical evidence and the confession Allen had reportedly made to fellow inmates. Allen was ultimately convicted and sentenced to 130 years in prison. The Delphi community and the nation closely followed the case. Memorials were established in the girls' honor, and their families continued to advocate for justice. Iowa. The Molly Tibbetts case is one that captured national attention in the United States due to its tragic nature and the public search effort that followed her disappearance. Molly Tibbetts was a 20-year-old University of Iowa student studying psychology. She was known for being kind, friendly, and deeply involved in her community. In the summer of 2018, she was living in Brooklyn, Iowa, a small town where she was staying with her boyfriend's brother and dog while working at a day camp. On the evening of July 18, 2018, Molly went for a run, something she did regularly. Surveillance footage showed her jogging near her neighborhood, but that night she didn't return. Her family and her boyfriend became worried after she failed to show up for work the next day. They reported her missing, and a massive search began. Law enforcement, volunteers, and even the FBI became involved in the search for Molly. For over a month, her case remained unsolved, and her disappearance became national news. In August 2018, investigators reviewed surveillance footage from a local residence. The footage showed a black Chevy Malibu repeatedly circling the area where Molly was running. Investigators traced the car to Kingston Rivera, a 24-year-old undocumented immigrant from Mexico who had been working at a dairy farm in the area under a false name. When questioned, Rivera initially denied involvement, but later confessed to following Molly in his car and approaching her. According to Rivera's confession, he approached Molly while she was jogging. She told him to leave her alone and threatened to call the police. He claimed he became angry and blacked out. He later came to and realized she was in the trunk of his car. Rivera led investigators to a cornfield where he had left her body covered with corn stalks. Molly's body was found on August 21, 2018, more than a month after she disappeared. An autopsy revealed that Molly Tibbetts died from multiple sharp force injuries consistent with being stabbed. The death was ruled a homicide. Rivera was charged with first-degree murder. His trial was delayed multiple times, but it finally began in May of 2021. During the trial, prosecutors presented Rivera's confession and evidence linking him to the crime. Rivera took the stand in his own defense and changed his story, claiming two masked men forced him to kidnap Molly and he was coerced into silence under threat to his family. The jury rejected his revised account. On May 28, 2021, Rivera was found guilty of first-degree murder. In August 2021, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The murder of Molly Tibbetts sparked political and public outcry, especially because Rivera was in the U.S. illegally. Some politicians used the case to argue for stricter immigration policies, which drew criticism from Tibbetts' family, who asked that Molly's death not be politicized. Her family focused on remembering Molly for who she was, loving, bright, and compassionate, and emphasized the importance of unity and healing rather than division. Kansas. The Clutter family murders occurred on November 15, 1959, in Holcomb, Kansas, and are among the most infamous crimes in American history. The brutal killings were later immortalized in Truman Capote's 1966 true crime classic, In Cold Blood, which brought national attention to the case. The Clutters were a well-respected and prosperous family in the small farming community of Holcomb. Herbert "Herb" Clutter, 48, was a successful wheat farmer and community leader. He was known for his generosity, strict morality, and being a devout Methodist. His wife, Bonnie Clutter, 45, struggled with depression and health problems. Their daughter, Nancy Clutter, 16, was a bright, popular high school student, active in the Future Homemakers of America, and a talented musician. Their son, Kenyon Clutter, 15, was a quiet boy who enjoyed carpentry and electronics. The Clutters lived in a large farmhouse outside Holcomb. They were the picture of the American dream, hard-working, upright, and close-knit. Dick Hickok and Perry Smith were ex-convicts who met in prison. While incarcerated, Hickok heard from a fellow inmate, Floyd Wells, that Herb Clutter was wealthy and kept a safe full of cash in his house. This turned out to be false. After being released, Hickok convinced Smith to help him rob the Clutter home. On the night of November 14th, they drove across Kansas with the intent to rob and leave no witnesses. The two men broke into the Clutter home in the early morning hours. They bound and gagged the entire family and searched for the non-existent safe. Finding only about $40 in cash, a radio, and a pair of binoculars, the pair debated what to do next. Ultimately, they murdered all 4 family members with a shotgun and a knife in cold blood. Herb Clutter was found in the basement with his throat cut and then shot in the head. Kenyon was tied to a couch in the basement and shot in the head. Nancy was shot in the back of the head while lying in bed. Bonnie was found in her own bed, also shot in the head. The killings were precise and cold, with each family member murdered in a different room, suggesting careful planning. The murders shocked Holcomb and quickly gained national attention. There were no initial suspects, and the crime scene offered few leads. The case broke open when Floyd Wells, the prison informant, tipped off authorities after learning about the murders. Hickok and Smith had fled to Mexico and later traveled across the U.S. committing small crimes. They were eventually caught in Las Vegas on December 30th, 1959, after authorities tracked their movements using bad checks they had written. Hickok and Smith were tried together in March 1960. Both were found guilty on 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. After years of appeals, both men were executed by hanging at the Kansas State Penitentiary on April 14, 1965. Kentucky. The disappearance of Crystal Rogers is one of the most haunting and high-profile unsolved cases in Kentucky, centered in Bardstown, a small town known for bourbon and beauty, and now a string of tragic, mysterious events. Crystal Rogers, a 35-year-old mother of 5, was a well-known resident of Bardstown, Kentucky. By all accounts, she was a devoted mother, known for her outgoing personality and deep love for her children. At the time of her disappearance, she lived with her boyfriend, Brooks Houck, the father of her youngest child and several of her children. Crystal was last seen alive on the night of July 3, 2015. According to her boyfriend Brooks, they had spent the evening at home playing games on their phones. He claimed he went to bed, and when he woke up, Crystal was gone. 2 days later, on July 5th, her maroon Chevrolet Impala was found abandoned along the Bluegrass Parkway a few miles from Bardstown. The car had a flat tire, and her keys, purse, and cell phone were still inside. Chilling signs that something was very wrong. Suspicion quickly focused on Brooks. He was the last person to see her, and his story had inconsistencies. During questioning by police, he appeared nervous and evasive. Compounding suspicion, he was interviewed with his brother Nick, a Bardstown police officer present, who allegedly interfered with the investigation and later refused a polygraph test. Nick was eventually fired from the department for obstructing the case. Despite the suspicion, Brooks was never immediately charged. He continued to claim innocence and maintained that he had nothing to do with Crystal's disappearance. Crystal's family, especially her mother, Shelley, became relentless advocates for justice. Shelley organized searches, maintained a visible presence in the media, and placed signs and billboards around town demanding justice. Tragedy struck again in 2016 when Crystal's father, Tommy, was shot and killed while hunting with his grandson. The case remains unsolved, but many, including Crystal's family, believe it was connected to Crystal's disappearance and their push for answers. After years of limited movement in the case, the FBI took over the investigation in August 2020. They launched a massive search of properties tied to Brooks and others, including excavation work, digital forensic analysis, and witness interviews. This new push renewed hope in the case. In a major development in October 2023, human remains were discovered in Nelson County. And in August 2023, a man named Joseph Lawson was indicted for conspiracy to commit murder and evidence tampering in connection with Crystal's case. Then, in September 2023, Brooks was finally arrested and indicted for murder and evidence tampering. This was the most significant break in the case in 8 years. Prosecutors alleged that Brooks was directly involved in Crystal's killing, though the details remain under seal pending trial. As of now, Brooks awaits trial, and the community of Bardstown continues to reel from the years of mystery and trauma. The Rogers family remains steadfast in their pursuit of full justice, not only for Crystal, but also for her father Tommy and the broader string of unsolved tragedies in the region. Louisiana. The Axeman of New Orleans is one of the most infamous and mysterious serial killers in American history. His crimes occurred between 1918 and 1919, and he became notorious for his brutal killings and the eerie nature of the attacks. New Orleans, Louisiana, in the early 20th century, was a bustling city with a rich cultural and social life. However, it was also a place where crime was not uncommon, particularly in its immigrant communities, which included a significant population of Italians. The city's police force was not particularly well equipped to handle the level of violence that was about to unfold. The Axeman's reign of terror began in May 1918, and for over a year he would strike at random, killing and maiming victims with an axe while they slept in their homes. His attacks would come without warning, leaving the city in a state of fear and confusion. The first known victims of the Axeman were Joseph and Catherine Maggio, an Italian immigrant couple. On May 23, 1918, they were brutally attacked in their home. The killer broke into their house during the night, using an axe that belonged to the couple. Joseph was murdered with a single blow to the head, and Catherine suffered severe head injuries before dying later from her wounds. The crime scene was gruesome, and there was no sign of robbery or other obvious motives, which perplexed the investigators. After the Maggios, the Axeman continued his rampage across the city. His victims were often Italian American, but it wasn't limited to just one group. The Axeman's method was chillingly consistent. He would break into his victims' homes, usually through a back door, and then bludgeon them while they slept, using an axe or other blunt weapon. Many of the victims were struck in the head and face, leaving gruesome wounds. In some cases, the killer would leave the axe at the scene, leading to speculation that it was not a typical robbery gone wrong. The lack of apparent motive only increased the terror and confusion surrounding the attacks. The most chilling aspect of the Axeman case was the letter that was sent to the local newspaper. On March 13, 1919, a local newspaper received a letter allegedly written by the Axeman himself. The letter reads as follows: Hell, March 13, 1919. Esteemed mortal, the Axeman is the man who is known as the Axeman. I am writing you this letter to tell you that I am very fond of jazz music. When I come to New Orleans, I will spare your life if you play jazz music. If you do not, I will kill you and your family. I am not a monster. I am simply a man who loves music. If you do play jazz, you will be saved. The letter was signed the Axeman. This bizarre communication sparked widespread fear and panic in the city. The Axeman seemed to suggest that he would spare anyone who played jazz music in their homes, creating an unsettling mix of horror and strange humor. Jazz music, which was popular in New Orleans at the time, became the focal point of a public reaction to the letter. In response to the Axeman's letter, many New Orleans residents did indeed hold jazz parties and played jazz music loudly in their homes on the night of March 19, 1919. The night became a kind of communal defiance against the killer. And while no murders were reported that night, it did not lead to the killer's capture or provide any clues about his identity. However, after this letter, the Axeman's killings stopped abruptly. His reign of terror lasted only from May 1918 to October 1919, and there were no murders attributed to him after that period. Some believe that the public response to the letter may have frightened him into stopping, while others speculate that he may have been caught or simply moved away from New Orleans. The identity of the Axeman has remained a mystery. Some believe the Axeman was a serial killer with a personal vendetta, possibly targeting specific individuals. The choice of victims, however, made it seem random. The victims of the Axeman were often Italian Americans, leading some to believe that the killer may have been connected to organized crime. However, no direct link to the mafia was ever proven. Another theory suggests that the Axeman may have been a former victim of a violent crime who sought revenge. It's also possible that the Axeman was simply a mentally unstable individual who became obsessed with the idea of violence and terror. Despite the passing of over a century, the Axeman of New Orleans remains an unsolved mystery. His story is one of the most chilling in the annals of American crime, and his murders still capture the public's imagination. The Axeman inspired songs, books, and films, and his eerie letter to the newspaper remains one of the most memorable aspects of the case. The crime spree itself, marked by its randomness, brutality, and the killer's eerie love of jazz music, continues to haunt the city of New Orleans to this day. Though his identity was never uncovered, the Axeman's impact on the culture of New Orleans endures. It's a case that still sparks fear and curiosity among those who study the darker side of history. Maine. The shooting of Corporal Eugene Cole occurred on the morning of April 25, 2018, in Norridge Walk, a small town in central Maine, and it became a tragic event that drew national attention. Corporal Eugene Cole was a 13-year veteran of the Somerset County Sheriff's Office. He was 62 years old, well respected by his colleagues, and known for his calm demeanor and dedication to law enforcement. On the morning of April 25th, Cole was on routine patrol in Norridge Walk, where he was assigned. At approximately 1 a.m. on April 25th, 2018, Cole stopped a vehicle near the Big Apple store in Norridge Walk, which was a common area of law enforcement activity. The driver, later identified as John D. Williams, was acting suspiciously, and there was a brief interaction between the two. Williams had a criminal history, and it's believed that Cole's stop was related to a suspicion of a crime, though the exact reason for the stop wasn't fully clear. Williams, 29 at the time, had recently been involved in a robbery at the Rite Aid pharmacy in Norridgewock. He had stolen prescription drugs and was trying to flee the area when Cole approached him. During the stop, Williams ambushed Cole. Williams shot him at close range using a handgun that he had stolen earlier. The details surrounding how Williams obtained the weapon were linked to previous criminal activity, including the robbery. The gunshot that struck Corporal Cole was fatal. After shooting Cole, Williams took his police-issued radio and gun, leaving Cole lying on the ground seriously injured. Williams fled the scene and Corporal Cole was left behind. It was later confirmed that Cole had been shot in the abdomen. The Somerset County Sheriff's Office and local law enforcement responded quickly, realizing that one of their own had been shot. A massive manhunt ensued, involving multiple law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, state police, and local police departments. Williams, who had fled the scene in Cole's police cruiser, was on the run for several days. His movements were tracked to various locations, including areas in the nearby towns of Skowhegan and Fairfield. After several days of searching, Williams was located and apprehended on April 27, 2018, in a wooded area near the town of Norridgewock. He was captured by a team of officers and taken into custody without further incident. During the arrest, Williams was charged with murder, robbery, and other offenses. Williams's trial began later in 2019. He pled guilty to the murder of Corporal Eugene Cole, and he was sentenced to 45 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The case deeply impacted the local community and the broader law enforcement community, as it highlighted the dangers that officers face every day while performing their duties. Corporal Eugene Cole's death was a major loss for Maine law enforcement. He was mourned by his colleagues, friends, and family, with his funeral attended by thousands, including many law enforcement officers from across the country. The incident also sparked conversations about officer safety and the risks faced by law enforcement officers, particularly in rural areas. In the aftermath of his death, his colleagues and the Somerset County Sheriff's Office established memorials in his honor. In addition, the state of Maine and local communities have continued to honor Cole's legacy, ensuring that his service and sacrifice are never forgotten. The shooting of Corporal Eugene Cole remains a somber reminder of the dangers faced by those who serve in law enforcement and the tragic impact the violence can have on communities. Maryland. Felicia Barnes was a 16-year-old African-American high school student from North Carolina. In December 2010, she traveled to Baltimore, Maryland, to visit her half-sister who was living in the area. Felicia had planned to spend the holidays in Baltimore, but she disappeared on December 28, 2010, while staying at her sister's apartment. Felicia's case quickly became a focal point for both local and national news outlets, with authorities and the public desperately searching for clues. On the morning of her disappearance, Felicia was last seen in her sister's apartment building in northwest Baltimore. She was supposed to meet her sister's boyfriend, but she had gone missing by the afternoon. The last confirmed sighting of her was around 10 a.m. After that, there were no more traces of her, and she failed to show up for a planned meeting with her half-sister later that day. Her family became worried, and her sister quickly reported her as missing. As the days passed and there were no signs of Felicia, the search for her intensified. Her case gained widespread media attention. Authorities, along with volunteers, began searching the city, and the family used social media to try to raise awareness about the missing teenager. The community became involved, organizing search efforts, and billboards were placed in high-traffic areas with Felicia's image and contact details. The search for Felicia Barnes continued for several months without any solid leads. In early February 2011, more than a month after she had vanished, Felicia's body was discovered in the Susquehanna River near a fishing pier in a rural area of northern Maryland, about 60 miles from Baltimore. Her body was found by a fisherman, and authorities confirmed it was her after conducting an autopsy. She had been dead for several weeks by the time her body was discovered. The discovery of Felicia's body set the stage for a homicide investigation. The cause of death was later determined to be strangulation. While the investigation initially involved several leads, it wasn't until later that police began focusing on her sister's boyfriend, Michael Johnson, as the prime suspect. Michael Johnson, who had been living with Felicia's sister at the time of her visit, was not initially considered a suspect. However, as the investigation unfolded, it was revealed that Johnson had a history of criminal behavior and had been the last person known to have seen Felicia alive. Additionally, surveillance footage showed him in the area around the time Felicia disappeared. Michael Johnson was arrested and charged with the murder of Felicia Barnes. Prosecutors argued that he had killed Felicia after an argument and had disposed of her body in the river. Johnson initially denied any involvement in her death and pled not guilty. During the trial, it was revealed that Johnson had a history of misconduct and was suspected of having inappropriate relationships with other young women. In March 2013, Johnson was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 40 years in prison. His conviction came after a lengthy trial in which prosecutors presented a variety of evidence, including witness testimony, DNA evidence, and the forensic findings that indicated Felicia's death was the result of foul play. The murder of Felicia Barnes had a lasting impact on her family, the Baltimore community, and even the nation. Her parents, particularly her mother, were vocal about the need for justice and the importance of finding answers. Her case also brought attention to the issue of missing persons, especially young people of color, and how these cases often don't receive the same level of attention from authorities or the media as cases involving white victims. The case also led to increased awareness of the issue of domestic violence, abuse, and the need for better protection of vulnerable individuals. Felicia's family became advocates for missing persons and worked to raise awareness about the dangers of situations involving manipulative and abusive individuals. Felicia Barnes' story has been remembered as one of loss and injustice, but also as a story of perseverance and the fight for justice. Her case highlighted the importance of both family and community in ensuring that missing person cases are taken seriously. Felicia's legacy is honored by her family's continued advocacy for victims of violence and abuse. This tragic event remains a poignant reminder of the horrors that many families face when they lose a loved one under such violent circumstances. Massachusetts. The Boston Marathon is one of the oldest and most prestigious annual marathon races in the world. Traditionally held on Patriots' Day, a holiday in Massachusetts. The race attracts runners from around the globe, and thousands of spectators gather along the route to cheer them on. The race covers 26.2 miles, starting in Hopkinton, Massachusetts, and finishing near the Boston Public Library on Boylston Street in Boston. On the morning of April 15, 2013, the Boston Marathon began as scheduled, with more than 27,000 runners participating, including elite athletes, amateur runners, and charity participants. Spectators lined the streets, and the atmosphere was festive, with crowds cheering for the runners as they passed by. However, the festive and celebratory mood was shattered at around 2:49 p.m. when two explosions occurred near the finish line of the marathon. The bombs were detonated about 13 seconds apart in quick succession. The first explosion occurred at the intersection of Boylston Street and Berkeley Street, near the finish line. The second blast followed soon after, around 200 yards away, at the intersection of Boylston and Exeter Streets. The bombs were homemade pressure cooker devices packed with shrapnel, nails, and ball bearings designed to maximize injury. The devices were placed in black backpacks and left on the ground near the marathon's finish line, a place that was packed with spectators, many of whom were waiting for loved ones to finish the race. The explosions caused immediate panic. Shattered glass, debris, and smoke filled the air, and many spectators were knocked to the ground. The blast resulted in the deaths of 3 people and injuries to over 260 others, making it one of the deadliest attacks of domestic terrorism in recent U.S. history. The response to the bombings was immediate. Police, fire, and medical personnel rushed to the scene, and nearby hospitals were put on high alert to treat the injured. Many runners, despite being exhausted, immediately turned back to help victims. Medical personnel were already on site due to the marathon's medical infrastructure, so they quickly began treating the wounded. The FBI was quickly called to the scene, and the investigation began almost immediately. Authorities began reviewing footage from the race, including security cameras and videos taken by spectators. The investigation focused on identifying the perpetrators and understanding how they were able to carry out the attack. The bombing was carried out by 2 brothers, Tamerlan Tsarnaev and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, who were of Chechen descent and had lived in the United States for several years. Tamerlan, the older brother, was reportedly motivated by extremist Islamic beliefs and had been investigated by the FBI prior to the bombing due to suspected ties to radical groups, though no charges were filed. The younger brother was a student at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth at the time. The Tsarnaev brothers had been planning the attack for months. They constructed the bombs using pressure cookers, filled them with explosive materials, and placed them at the finish line. After the bombing, they fled the scene, setting off a chain of events that would lead to a manhunt across Boston and surrounding areas. The bombings were followed by a massive manhunt. On the evening of April 18, 2013, Tamerlan and Dzhokhar engaged in a shootout with law enforcement officers in the Boston suburb of Watertown. Tamerlan was killed during the gunfight, while Dzhokhar managed to escape. The following day, the authorities conducted a lockdown of Boston and its surrounding areas. urging residents to stay indoors as they searched. The city's transit system was shut down and businesses were closed. After a tense day, Dzhokhar was discovered hiding in a boat in a backyard in Watertown, bleeding from gunshot wounds. He was captured alive and taken into custody. The attack left a lasting impact on Boston and the broader United States. The bombing sparked a nationwide conversation about terrorism, security, and the threat of radicalization. The people of Boston displayed remarkable resilience in the face of this tragedy, with the slogan "Boston Strong" becoming a symbol of the city's recovery and unity. The investigation revealed that the Tsarnaev brothers had been motivated by extremist beliefs, with the older brother reportedly influenced by radical ideologies he had encountered through online propaganda. He may have been inspired by groups like Al-Qaeda, though there was no direct evidence of their involvement. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was eventually tried and convicted for his role in the bombing. In 2015, he was sentenced to death, although his sentence was later commuted to life in prison without the possibility of parole after a lengthy legal battle. The case of the Boston Marathon bombings remains one of the most significant and tragic events in recent U.S. history. In the aftermath of the bombings, there were numerous tributes to the victims, including memorial services, fundraisers, and events to support those affected. The bombing also led to changes in security at large public events and marathons, which increased surveillance and new protocols to prevent similar attacks in the future. The bombing had a profound effect on Boston, its residents, and the nation as a whole. The resilience of the people of Boston, particularly the first responders and citizens who helped the victims in the aftermath, became a source of inspiration. The annual Boston Marathon continues to be held, but with increased security measures, serving as a reminder of both tragedy and the strength of the city and its people. Michigan. The Kalamazoo Uber driver shootings was a series of fatal shootings that took place on the evening of February 20th, 2016 in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Carried out by Jason Brian Dalton, a 45-year-old former Uber driver. The shootings shocked the local community and the nation as they unfolded over several hours in a seemingly random and unprovoked manner. Jason Dalton was a 45-year-old man who had been working as an Uber driver for several months leading up to the events of February 20th, 2016. He had no known history of violence or criminal behavior before the shootings. Dalton's life appeared ordinary, but on the night of the killings, his actions took a horrific turn. Dalton had been working as an Uber driver on the evening of February 20th, transporting passengers in the Kalamazoo area. He had picked up a passenger earlier in the evening, and during this ride he seemed perfectly normal. However, by the time he dropped off the passenger, Dalton had begun his violent spree, and the night would devolve into chaos. The first shooting occurred at approximately 6 p.m. at the Tin Shop Apartments on the southwest side of Kalamazoo. A woman named Teresa and her 17-year-old daughter, who were sitting in a car, were shot. The mother survived, but the daughter, who had been sitting in the passenger seat, was killed. At this time, Jason Dalton was not yet known to be the shooter, and no immediate connection was made to his role as an Uber driver. Dalton continued his rampage after the first shooting. A few hours later, at about 10 p.m., he opened fire at a different location, the Meadows Townhomes. This is where the majority of the victims were shot. In this incident, a man named Richard and his son Tyler were shot at the scene. Tyler survived but was seriously injured. Tragically, Richard did not survive. Dalton then moved on to another nearby area, continuing the violence without any apparent motive. Dalton's final and deadliest shooting occurred when he shot and killed 4 people who were sitting in a car outside a local restaurant. The victims were shot at close range while sitting in their vehicle. It was during this time that authorities began to realize that these shootings were all connected, as they had been happening in a similar manner in different parts of the city. At some point during the night, Dalton picked up another Uber passenger. Little did the passenger know they were riding with a killer. That ride ended when the passenger reached their destination and Dalton was still on the loose, but police were beginning to close in on him. Dalton was arrested on February 21st, 2016, after a series of tips led local law enforcement to identify him as the prime suspect. He was found sitting in his car at a Kalamazoo shopping center, where he was taken into custody without incident. During the investigation, it was revealed that Dalton had no known history of mental illness or criminal behavior. He was married with children, and the neighbors described him as a quiet, reserved man. Dalton was reportedly active in his community, and his behavior before the killings seemed to be normal. However, investigators discovered that he may have been struggling with personal issues in the weeks leading up to the shootings, including problems with his marriage and financial difficulties. Dalton later told authorities that he felt compelled to commit the shootings, but he had no clear motive. He explained that he had been having bad thoughts and felt as though he was being controlled by an external force, though he did not explicitly state that he had had a specific target or reason for the attacks. Jason Dalton was charged with multiple counts of murder and attempted murder. In January 2019, he pled guilty to all charges, including 6 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. As part of a plea agreement, he avoided the death penalty, but he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The shooting spree in Kalamazoo raised significant questions about the safety of ride-sharing services like Uber and Lyft. While Uber had performed background checks on Dalton before hiring him, there were concerns about whether these checks were thorough enough to prevent individuals with potential violent tendencies from driving for the company. The Kalamazoo Uber driver shootings deeply impacted the Kalamazoo community and left the families of the victims grappling with the loss of their loved ones. It also sparked a broader conversation about mental health, gun control, and the regulation of ride-sharing companies. In the aftermath of the shooting, Uber and other ride-sharing companies began to review and refine their screening and safety procedures. Public awareness about the potential dangers associated with ride-sharing services increased, and many questioned whether the systems in place were sufficient to prevent similar tragedies from occurring again. The Kalamazoo shootings also left a lasting emotional impact on the survivors, some of whom continue to cope with the trauma of the event. The tragedy served as a reminder of the unpredictable nature of violence and the importance of both mental health support and preventative measures in society. Minnesota. Jacob Wetterling was born on February 17, 1978, to parents Jerry and Patty Wetterling. He had a younger brother, Trevor, and a younger sister, Amy. The The Wetterling family lived in St. Joseph, a small town in central Minnesota. Jacob was known for being a kind, intelligent, and curious young boy who loved sports and had a passion for his family. On the night of his abduction, Jacob had been out with his brother Trevor and a friend Aaron for an evening bike ride. The three of them had been on a trip to a nearby store to buy candy, and they were heading home when the events that would change their lives forever unfolded. At approximately 9 p.m. on October 22, 1989, Jacob, his brother Trevor, and their friend Aaron were riding their bikes home from the convenience store. They were about a mile from their house on a rural road not far from where the Wetterling family lived. As they neared the end of a long dirt road, a man appeared from behind a set of trees. The man, described as being in his mid-20s to early 30s, was wearing a mask and holding a gun. He ordered the boys to stop, in a chilling moment, instructed them to lie down on the ground. The man told the boys to keep their heads down, warning them that if they looked up, they would be shot. Trevor, who was younger and frightened, later said that the man told them he was a cop. The man then grabbed Jacob, telling him to walk with him. Jacob tried to resist, but the man told him not to make any noise. Jacob's last words were, "I'll be back, I promise." He was forced into the woods, disappearing into the night. Trevor and Aaron were left behind, terrified and alone. They later ran to a nearby home to seek help. When authorities were alerted, a massive search effort began immediately. The Wetterling family, along with the local community, was devastated by Jacob's disappearance. A massive search was launched, involving law enforcement officers from across the state, local volunteers, and the FBI. The search continued for days, weeks, and even months, with no sign of Jacob. The case gained national attention, and in the wake of his disappearance, several theories about what had happened to Jacob began to emerge. One of the most notable aspects of the investigation was the investigation of a man who had been seen in the area around the time of Jacob's abduction. Over the years, there were numerous false leads, and the case began to go cold. In 1990, just a few months after Jacob was abducted, another abduction occurred in nearby Sauk Rapids, Minnesota. That case, however, was solved quickly, and the suspect was arrested. This man was eventually ruled out as a suspect in Jacob's case, but it added to the sense of unease and fear in the community. The FBI took a central role in the investigation. Over the years, agents followed leads, spoke with hundreds of potential suspects, and conducted interviews. However, the case remained unsolved. In the years following the abduction, the Wetterling family endured heartbreak, uncertainty, and hope that someday their son would be found. As the years passed, Jacob's abduction remained a source of emotional pain for the Wetterling family and the broader community. The case became a symbol of missing children, and in 1994, the Jacob Wetterling Crimes Against Children and Sexually Violent Offender Registration Act was passed. This law created a national database for offenders and required law enforcement to track their movements. This law was named after Jacob to honor him and ensure that no other family would go through the same tragedy. After more than 26 years, the mystery of Jacob's disappearance was finally solved. In 2016, a man named Danny Heinrich, who had been a suspect in the case for years, was arrested for the abduction and murder of Jacob Wetterling. Heinrich, who had been previously interviewed by investigators, had been connected to the case through DNA evidence. Heinrich had been living in Minnesota under a different name, and for years he had denied any involvement in the abduction. However, a breakthrough came when investigators connected Heinrich to another crime that had occurred in the area around the same time as Jacob's abduction. On September 6, 2016, Heinrich confessed to abducting and killing Jacob. He led investigators to a site where Jacob's remains were found, buried in a field about 20 miles from the Wetterling's family home. Heinrich explained that he had abducted Jacob, taken him to a secluded area, and assaulted him before killing him. The motive for the crime was never fully explained, and it remains one of the most chilling aspects of the case. The discovery of Jacob's remains brought a sense of closure to the Wetterling family, but it also left them devastated by the confirmation of their worst fear. Patty and Jerry Wetterling were determined to keep their son's memory alive and honor his legacy. They continued to advocate for the safety of children and for changes in the legal system to protect families from the horrors of abduction and violence. In 2017, the Wetterling family, along with advocates for missing children, pushed for changes in how the justice system handled cases of abduction and child abuse. The case brought greater awareness to the need for stronger laws protecting children and led to significant reforms in how such crimes are handled by authorities. Jacob Wetterling's story, while tragic, ultimately helped to shape the legal landscape surrounding child abductions and the safety of children across the United States. His memory continues to inspire both grief and hope, and his case stands as a reminder of the importance of vigilance and advocacy for the protection of children everywhere. Mississippi. Kingston Frazier was a 6-year-old boy from Jackson, Mississippi. His mother, Latasha Frazier, had gone through a tough time, and on the morning of May 18, 2017, she left her son in the back of the car while she ran into a local store. This seemingly routine moment quickly turned into a nightmare when the car was stolen, with Kingston inside. The incident occurred in broad daylight. Latasha had parked her car outside a Kroger store on Northside Drive in Jackson, Mississippi, while she went inside to buy some groceries. Kingston was asleep in the back seat of the car. However, when Latasha returned to her car around 1 p.m., she was horrified to discover that it had been stolen, with her son inside. Latasha immediately called the police, and the authorities began a search for the car and her son. The vehicle was a gray 2000 Toyota Avalon, and authorities worked quickly trying to gather any surveillance footage from nearby businesses and gathering information from the community. As the search intensified, the police identified 2 suspects in the theft of the car: 18-year-old Byron McBride and 17-year-old Cedric Hester. McBride was the one who had stolen the car. Later police reports confirmed that McBride had a history of thefts and other criminal activities, and that he was reportedly attempting to flee the scene with Kingston still inside. Later, the investigators determined that McBride and Hester had a plan to use the car for a robbery. McBride had taken Kingston with him, not intending to harm the child, but in a misguided attempt to get away from police. The kidnapping quickly escalated into a tragedy. After McBride and Hester were arrested, authorities learned that the child was tragically shot and left in the woods. Kingston was found hours later on the evening of May 18, 2017, near a wooded area in Jackson. He had been shot in the back of the head, and his body was left discarded in a makeshift grave. His life had been taken far too soon. Byron McBride was arrested and charged with capital murder, kidnapping, and other related charges. The case sent shockwaves through the community as the brutal and senseless killing of a young child left many people devastated. McBride, who was 18 at the time of the crime, was ultimately convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Cedric Hester, the accomplice, faced charges related to the kidnapping and conspiracy, but he was not directly involved in the murder itself. Kingston Frazier's death stirred a wave of public outcry in Jackson and beyond. The community, along with people across the country, mourned the loss of a young life. Kingston had his whole future ahead of him, but it was stolen in an instant by the reckless actions of the suspects. Kingston's family was devastated by the loss, and his mother, Latasha Frazier, spoke publicly about her grief and the tragedy of losing her son in such a senseless manner. The case highlighted the dangers of car theft and the vulnerability of children in such situations. It also brought attention to the problem of violent crime in Jackson, a city that had faced challenges with increasing crime rates in recent years. The Kingston Frazier case remains one of the most heart-wrenching events in Jackson's recent history. It serves as a reminder of how quickly a life can be taken and how important it is to protect our children from harm. Kingston's story touched many people's hearts, and his death led to calls for increased safety measures, more attention to youth crime, and stronger consequences for those involved in violent acts. His family's pain and the sadness of the community still linger, and Kingston Frazier will forever be remembered as a young boy whose life was taken too soon. Missouri. Molly Watson, a 35-year-old woman from Huntsville, Missouri, was tragically murdered on April 27, 2018, just 2 days before her planned wedding to James Addy. Her body was discovered on a rural road near Middle Grove in Monroe County, Missouri, laying outside her car with a gunshot wound to the back of her head. James Addy, a 51-year-old corrections officer at the Moberly Correctional Center, had been secretly involved with Watson for approximately 7 years. Despite being married to his wife of 22 years, Melanie Addy, he had led a double life, falsely telling Watson that his wife had died in a car accident. Watson, deeply in love with Addy, was unaware of his deception. The night Watson's body was found, a passerby noticed headlights near a creek bed and upon investigation discovered the body. Tire tracks near the scene were consistent with Addy's vehicle. When authorities went to inform Addy of Watson's death, they were greeted by his wife, revealing his secret affair. In April 2021, after a 4-day trial, a Cole County jury convicted Addy of first-degree murder and armed criminal action. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 10 years for the armed criminal action charge. Molly Watson is remembered as a devoted mother and a woman who cherished her family. Her tragic death highlighted the dangers of domestic deception and the importance of trust in relationships. Thank you for watching Part 2, The 50 States of True Crime, Series 2. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll be notified every time we upload a new video. Hit the like button and leave us a comment down below. And until next time, stay curious.